I've got all the cases that all these people reference, Dr. Walker's 8 criteria for battered women syndrome, because that I was telling you on live the other night about the book that I had read in college called When Battered Women Kill. Dr. Walker, Lenore Walker, she sort of came up with battered women syndrome back in 1979, and she's still alive and well and working in Florida. So she has 8 criteria for battered women syndrome. We've got the Florida Rule of Criminal Procedure 3.216, which the state and the defense are fighting over each other, or fighting back and forth about. Florida statute for second-degree murder. So I just put all these different pieces in here. Battered women syndrome didn't come out of the legislature. It came out of case law, right? It was an evolution, basically, of self-defense. And then it kept evolving because they eventually had to change it for, it's called the Castle Doctrine, where you don't have a duty to retreat if you are inside your house and somebody inside your house attacks you. And at first it was, okay, women could put up a battered spouse defense if somebody from the outside comes and attacks her in her home, like her boyfriend, but not if he lives there with her. So they actually, I know, right? So it's taken 27 years, but it's been an evolution. So that's why I put these cases in here, but also because the parties are citing these cases.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, listen, you guys, you just came in on a moment of Sam and I having a discussion about case law and why we are going to be looking at the case of Marcia Thompson. And today I have it pulled up here. So let's get to it. We're going to be watching her opening statements. This case is actually not that old, you guys. You may remember it quite well, or you may be somewhat familiar with it.
Marcia Thompson was fed up. Her husband, Terry, had been arguing with her for hours, and she'd had it. So she shot and killed him while he was lying on the couch. And she didn't shoot him just one time or just 2 times. She shot him 9 times. So let's go back to the early morning hours of August 9th of 2019. You're going to hear that the police responded to a home out in Waxahachie on Murcott Drive. That's where they saw this defendant coming out of the home. She was wearing a full police uniform, duty belt around her waist, had everything in it, but it was missing one thing: her duty firearm. That firearm was on the refrigerator inside of the house where she was instructed to leave it since she had just used it to shoot her husband. First responders go inside of the home, and when they get there, they see Terry Thompson lying face down in front of the couch. They can tell just by looking that there are apparent gunshot wounds to his back, because that's what they can see. And they find this defendant and Terry's young children in their bedrooms. Now you're going to hear.
They had audio issues.
Oh, and as you can see, the audio just dropped out. So here's what we're going to do.
I don't know if they have the speed up option on here.
We'll hit the rewind button right now, so you'll see everything from the moment that she stopped talking until now. Take a look.
So I was talking about crime scene. And you're going to get to see what that crime scene looked like before it was disturbed at all. And then you're going to hear how they document this crime scene. You're going to get to see and hear about the fact that there were no weapons around Mr. Thompson at all. The only thing even close to Mr. Thompson were a blanket, a pillow, a laptop, and a heating pad that he had been laying on. But But you aren't going to have to analyze this crime scene by yourself. Not only are you going to hear from the crime scene investigator that went out to the scene, you're also going to hear from somebody named Daniel Steelman. And Mr. Steelman is actually a lieutenant with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office. Now, Baldwin County's in Alabama, but he's also going to tell you that he works for a company and he's an expert in crime scene reconstruction techniques. And he's going to explain how he used bloodstain pattern analysis and ballistics reconstruction to determine the positioning of Terry Thompson when he was shot. And here's what he's going to tell you. He's going to tell you that Terry Thompson was laying on his back on the couch when he was shot twice in the chest. And that the third shot came as his arm is coming across his body as he's rolling off the couch. He's going to explain to you how he knows this. And then he's going to explain how Terry Thompson fell face first off the couch, where he was then shot 6 times in the back. You're also going to hear from the lead detective in this case, Detective Jeremy Gelfand. And he's going to explain all about his investigation, what he did once he got out to Murcott Drive. And the bulk of his testimony and the bulk of his investigation is going to involve his interviews with this defendant. There were 2 of them. And you're going to have an opportunity to hear them. They were all recorded in like a command bus that was brought out to the scene. You're going to hear what happened from this defendant's point of view. That she and Terry had been arguing for several hours. That the argument started when Terry was on his way home from Broward County on the phone and continued after he got home. He was in Broward County, as you'll hear in the interview, because he had been having migraines over several days. And you're going to hear over the course of that interview about all of the ailments that Mr. Thompson had, that he had back problems, that he had neck problems. You're also going to hear that the entirety of the interaction between Terry Thompson and Marcia Thompson that night until shots were fired was verbal. And what you'll hear is during this verbal argument that at some point this defendant goes into her bedroom to get ready for work. And she estimates that took about 15 minutes for her to get ready for work. She put on her uniform. She put on her hair up. She put in her earrings. And then she tells Detective Gelfand that the next thing she remembers is hearing shots.
Is it just me, or does that look like a really nice house that they had, considering that she was the only one bringing in income?
No, it does look like a nice house.
I guess she made good money doing what she was doing.
Maybe.
If you guys aren't familiar with this case, wait. We're going to be getting into some more, but wait till you hear about what a piece of crap this guy is.
And the reason why we're looking at this case is because Sarah Boone's new attorney, what's his first name? James Owens.
Jamie.
Is it Jamie? James?
Just James. I call him the defense. I call him the Three Stooges. Jamie, Becky, and Tony.
Okay. James mentioned it in his sort of initial appearance before the judge. He was talking about this case. And so when he said that, I went on a little search to see, because it was so recent. And there's a lot to compare here to Sarah's case. So that's why we're looking at it from here.
Now, another thing you're going to hear in that statement is about the background of the relationship between Terry Thompson and this defendant. Not going to sugarcoat it for you. It was a tumultuous relationship. There are allegations of domestic violence. She talks about specific instances in the past of violence. Doesn't really paint Mr. Thompson in the best light. But what you're going to hear from that statement is that on that night, the most egregious thing that Terry Thompson used were his words. He made threats, but he did absolutely nothing in furtherance of those threats. Now, the state also anticipates that you're going to hear from some witnesses about specific acts of violence by Terry Thompson. And it's likely going to be hard to hear. We talked a little bit about that in jury selection. But at the end of this trial, the judge is going to instruct you on the law, and specifically the law on when it is acceptable to use deadly force. And when you apply the facts of this case from this night on August 9th of 2019, the fact that Terry Thompson was laying on the couch under a blanket and a pillow, unarmed, just using his words, you are going to find that there was no imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to this defendant. She didn't like what he was saying. She was fed up, and she wanted to put an end to it. So she did. And the state is confident that after hearing all of this evidence, that you will find her guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolinski. Ms. Michelli, do you wish to have an opening statement?
Marcia Thompson is not guilty. The evidence will show you that after several years of physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse, Terry Thompson, her husband, had made a decision to kill her, and he told her that he was going to do it. The evidence will show that Marcia and Terry met in college. He was Marcia's first and only boyfriend. They dated for several years before they got married and had 2 children. He was 13 years older than Marcia Thompson. At first, he was very charming, but not long after they started dating, the affection turned to jealousy and control, psychological and emotional abuse. It started with insisting that Marcia Thompson have a phone on her 24 hours a day, answer the calls in the middle of the night, whether she had a test the next day, no matter what was going on. The phone rings, she better pick it up. It went into calling her constantly to see where she is and what she's doing, controlling who she was allowed to speak to, where she was allowed to go, where she was allowed to be, what she was allowed to do, what she was allowed to wear, where she was allowed to work. And certainly, it was that she was to obey Terry Thompson and never talk back. After several years, in 2006, it evolved into the darkness of physical violence. You will hear their arguments were typically about 2 things. 1, Terry Thompson habitually accused her of cheating or flirting or inappropriate behavior in that sense. And 2, Marcia Thompson simply wasn't good enough. She wasn't a good enough wife. She wasn't a good enough mother. She wasn't a good enough worker. She wasn't a good enough person. She wasn't pretty enough. Her hair wasn't right. Her clothes weren't right. She didn't do enough for the family. In 2006, Terry Thompson accused Marcia of being unfaithful. And in a fit of rage, he violently attacked her. He pushed her. He punched her. He choked her. And he sexually assaulted her by penetrating her with a lotion bottle. Marcia Thompson was shocked. She did not fight back. She forgave her husband when he apologized. The control and the berating continued, but things were fairly calm for about a year until an incident where Marcia Thompson's work phone rang very late at night. Okay. Terry Thompson became enraged, insisting that it meant that Marcia was cheating on him. He attacked her. He pulled her hair, pulled her down to the ground, kicked her in the stomach, and choked her. He apologized, and she forgave him. But unfortunately, the abuse became commonplace in the relationship. On approximately a monthly basis, Terry Thompson would push, hit, shove, kick Marcia Thompson. The sexual abuse and instances were less often, but more violent and more intense. They resulted in injuries to her and bleeding. Each time he would apologize, and each time she would forgive him. He also started to inform Marcia Thompson about facts about his prior violence against women, which she hadn't known about until then. He told her about it himself, and he even bragged about it and used it as something to scare her further with. The evidence will show that in 2011, independent witnesses called the police after Terry Thompson attacked Marcia Thompson in public. She was holding their 1-year-old daughter when he dragged her by her hair and punched her repeatedly. She was hospitalized. On another occasion, in 2016, a few years later, you will hear witness testimony as well about an occasion where a friend witnessed the violence of Terry Thompson toward Marcia Thompson. In addition to these abuses and to recounting to Marcia how he abused other women and others in order to scare her, he would also act out violently in front of Marcia toward other people on a regular basis. Over the years, there were ups and downs. There were lulls. When Marcia Thompson had a baby, there might pass a couple of years without a extremely violent outburst, but the emotional and psychological control was always there. Now, the year that was leading up to the incident of the shooting, in that year, the abuse was increasing, both in number of incidents and also in intensity. During this time, the evidence will show that Terry Thompson began threatening to kill Marcia Thompson. He threatened her with a machete that he kept by the bed and constantly spoke about. He actually went after her with the machete. He threatened her by putting a gun to her and threatening to shoot if she didn't, quote unquote, tell the truth about cheating, what he thought to be cheating. He started telling her that it's not just her, that he would hurt her family members, that he would kill them. He also became increasingly violent toward their young children, in particular their son, who was 6 and 7 years old at this time. He would keep knives hidden around the house and remind her that she may know where some of them are, but she doesn't know where all of them are, and that he could kill her at any time. The evidence will show that a year before the shooting, Marcia and Terry went out golfing with friends and coworkers of Marcia's. Instead of a nice time, Terry Thompson went after an elderly gentleman with a golf club to try and harm him. Marcia was watching the entire time. Terry Thompson blamed Marcia for this event. He believed she was having an affair with one of her coworkers. He punished her. But what was different this time is that Terry Thompson was no longer apologizing. That's a change after all these years. He wasn't apologizing. He was continuing to berate and blame Marcia, and he was unable to let it go. Months were passing. He was continuing to bring it up and start fights and arguments and physical assaults on Marcia because of this incident. Terry Thompson, soon after, called members of Marcia's immediate family, her father, her grandmother, her brother, and told them they would regret it. He would kill them, while Marcia was watching him crying in the background while he made these calls. He forced Marcia to make a sexual harassment complaint against a coworker. She did it. She did whatever he asked. He began contacting her boss to complain about what had happened at the golfing incident. He started calling Marcia even more often at work, incessantly calling, and she better take that call no matter what. He also started following Marcia, stalking her, watching her, and telling her, I am watching you all the time. If I see you with Brandon Steiner, this coworker, I will kill you both. If I see you somewhere you're not supposed to be, I will kill you. Throughout the relationship, but particularly in the last year, Marcia did anything and everything to appease Terry Thompson, to try to calm him down, to get him to move forward, to be sweet with him. But nothing worked. It stopped working. His rage persisted. You will hear from her boss that Marcia was bringing her kids to work every day after school so as not to leave them with Terry Thompson. You will hear that Terry Thompson didn't work. Marcia Thompson did work full time. She would have to get her kids and bring them there to try to protect them at every moment that she could. In the very early hours of August 9th, 2019, Terry Thompson was driving home. Marcia had to be at work at 6 a.m. But instead of sleeping, she was on the phone with Terry, trying to calm him down while he berated her for not being a good mother, doing enough at home, doing enough for the family, doing good at her job. And again, the golfing incident. By the time he arrived home, he was irate. He came in with a demeanor, with a way about him that Marcia Thompson saw a difference, recognized it, and she knew what was coming. He threw a TV remote at her as she tried to calm him on the couch and hand him a remote so he could watch TV. He threw the remote at her, hit her in the chest. Marcia continued to try to calm him down. She started to rub his feet. That was something that he liked, and that was something that she generally did in the relationship to help him feel better, to calm him down. She started rubbing his feet, speaking to him sweetly, but nothing worked. He told her, he may have said it before, but it's different this time. This time, I'm going to kill you. Kept repeating it no matter what she did. He knew she had to get to work, knew she had to get dressed. It's getting close to 5 o'clock in the morning. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to leave him in that state. She has her 2 children asleep. She doesn't want to leave and go to work. She makes a phone call. She makes a phone call to a coworker to see if someone can cover for her so she doesn't have to go. She's not able to reach anyone. She discusses with him that she has to go to work. He says, I know why you're going over there, and I'll knife him. He's saying, I know you're going to work just to be with Brandon Steiner, and I'll knife him. She's at a loss for what to do, can't find anyone to cover, can't leave here and leave my kids alone with this man. He's continuously saying he's going to kill her. She leaves to go to the other room, getting dressed. As she's in that room, he's continuously calling out threats to her. He had ready access to numerous weapons. He had a machete by the bed that he had used to be violent toward her and had told her how he had used it against other women in the past as well. He would keep knives in different places like we discussed. And in fact, a common place for him to keep a knife was in the couch he was on between the cushions. He had a golf club, which you'll see was in the corner of the room, feet away from him. He had removed the head of the golf club, and that was there to discipline Marcia and the children. There was a gun in the house that he had access to, and he insisted to always have access to the gun. And he had prior threatened her with that gun. He had ready access to all of this within seconds, and she didn't know what might be in the couch. And the last thing he said to her was, if you come out of that room, I'm going to kill you. By this time, she's dressed, walking out of the room, has her duty weapon on her. And in an act of self-defense, with an imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, Marcia Thompson shot Terry Thompson. She immediately called 911. She proceeded to fully cooperate with the entire investigation with every officer. What you didn't hear is that she told them that she was afraid, that he told her he was going to kill her, that there was a history of violence, that she felt he was going to kill her. She still believed he would have killed her, that she acted in self-defense. You will hear testimony from a forensic psychologist, a Dr. Michael Brannon, who will explain to you what battered women's syndrome or battered spouse syndrome is, the research in the field, and his evaluation of Marcia Thompson. He will testify that as the syndrome relates to self-defense, the battered woman's perception of imminent danger is affected by her experiences in the abusive relationship. That a battered woman will be reasonably in fear of death or great bodily harm in a situation that another person who was not the victim of repeat abuse would not. Dr. Brannon will explain the cycle of violence, the attack, the violence, the apology, the period of peace, and how a victim of domestic violence is affected over time. He will testify as to why a battered woman would feel that leaving a relationship is impossible. Dr. Brannon will also testify that a battered woman, as a means of survival, develops a sense of what is happening with her abuser. How upset is he? How bad will the abuse be? Is this different? Is this worse? Marcia Thompson wasn't fed up because of a night where she was forced to stay up awake before work to argue with her husband again. She was the victim of abuse for many, many years. She was exhausted and in horrible, unbearable fear. Terry Thompson was telling her he was going to kill her. She could see it was different. With the escalating violence and the violence in front of others, he was losing control of himself. She knew he was going to kill her. He had every ability to kill her. She couldn't leave her children there like that. She couldn't just let herself be killed. She had to protect her life. She had to protect her children's life. We ask that you pay very close attention to the evidence in this case. No one will decide whether Marcia Thompson defended herself except for you. No one can decide for you or interpret the law for you. You will apply the law and you will decide if Marcia Thompson reasonably believed that she was in imminent danger, death, or great bodily harm. Don't be distracted by crime scene evidence where Marcia Thompson has always admitted that she shot Terry Thompson. Once you hear and see the evidence, you will know that Marcia Thompson defended herself. We trust that you will return the only just verdict, a verdict of not guilty.
But that was really interesting, right? If you take everything that the defense just said and you compare it to Sarah, what do you see?
Huge differences.
Right?
He was the active aggressor.
Sarah?
Well, this guy was completely out of control.
Mm-hmm. I took extensive notes during that. The defenses, both openings actually, and the defense was very clear in the wording that she used. And it will go back to that line of cases we were talking about. It will go back to the language that's in the rules. It will go back to what we are seeing being filed in Sarah's case. On both sides, the defense's motion and the state's motions back to strike whatever the defense has just filed. So her language there was really key. She also described what is known as this sort of three-phase cycle of abuse. So there's a calm period, then there's a escalation into abuse, and then that comes down into like an overly apologetic before going back to sort of a normal again. And that calm period or that honeymoon period, those were shrinking to, according to this attorney, right? It wasn't working anymore. Her efforts to try to appease him wasn't working anymore. And she also addressed the idea of battered women's perception being different than a regular person's perception of being in danger, and that it's heightened and developed over time. Just like if you were married to someone and you could gauge their good moods or their bad moods, or you knew that they were always going to leave their socks on the floor, or whatever that is, that you get to know a person, that same perception develops in battered women. And they know when something's different. And that's why that time, she kept saying, that time it was different. Sorry. All right. So in the state's opening, they basically said she was fed up. She was just tired of him. So she shot him while he was sleeping on the couch. And there were 6 gunshot wounds to his back. Kids were in the house. She talked about there were 2 in custody interviews with the defendant. She and Terry had been arguing for several hours on the phone and continued when he got home, that he was in chronic pain due to neck and back problems. That fight that night was only verbal. Only verbal. She put a lot of emphasis on that. Only verbal. There were only allegations of past violence. That there was no imminent danger. And that it was not acceptable for her to use deadly force that night. And she has emphasized again that there was no physical violence. Whereas in the defense opening, we learned that this was her first and only boyfriend. He's her husband. He's 13 years older than her. He subjected her to years of psychological abuse. Control, right?
She didn't have a lot of...
Control over everything. The who, what, when, where. Answer your phone. What are you doing? Where are you going? Why are you not answering? Right? That's sort of the opening flags. Bless you.
Thank you. She didn't have a lot of self-confidence, and he took advantage of that.
Well, he kept instilling in her that she wasn't good enough. She didn't do things right. She wasn't pretty enough. She wasn't a good mom. All he did was break her down. So she mentioned a 2006 brutal attack where she forgave him, which is what they do. Approximately monthly, he would go on to physically assault her. He always apologized. He started to tell her, basically threaten her, about his violence against his prior girlfriends. And if I understand correctly, one of the prior girlfriends testifies in this trial. Is that right?
I really don't understand, everyone, what's going on with that piece of it, but they don't have everything on court TV. So this trial wasn't fully televised. So we have only bits and pieces. But if you guys want to hear the testimony that this girl went through some hell.
Well, they put her up there as a proffer. Unfortunately, we don't know what the outcome was. So they would have taken the jury out, and the state doesn't want her to testify, right? That's what's happening. So the defense has to put her on the stand and allow for her to basically testify as if she were testifying. We saw this actually happen for anybody. I know I referenced Murdaugh, and you guys did Brooks, and I didn't do Brooks, so I have to keep referencing Murdaugh. But we saw that happen in real time there, where the one side will object to the other having this witness testify. So they take the jury out, and the witness comes up and testifies or proffers. And then the judge will determine whether the witness can come in or not. And I honestly don't know what happened. We saw her testimony, but I don't know what the outcome was.
Yeah, they never told us, and I guess that's something that we can dive into at a later time. But right now, we wanted to just get to the different case laws and whatnot so that Sam could explain to you guys. We're kind of confused on to why James Owens is jumping on this like he is.
Okay, so let's look at the most recent court filings. So I think is it possible I'm missing one? So we have that's the defense response to the state's motion to strike. So the defense had to have filed something a couple of days ago. The state would have filed the motion to strike, which I think we may have looked at in another video.
Yeah.
And now the defense has responded, and it's within this response, the defense response on the motion to strike, that we see some of the language in the case law coming up that I've pulled the case law. I've highlighted some of the passages, because like I said, this defense, which is grounded in self-defense, it has evolved over the years. Right. So one of the things that is being argued back and forth is whether there was enough time for the defense to provide everything to the state that the state is demanding. Right. This state filed their own sort of motion for particulars about the defense, like what were they intending to introduce, and in that highlighted portion there. That's just saying, this is the defense counsel is saying, look, we didn't have enough time to get into all of this. Therefore, it doesn't matter that he's just arguing here. He's saying, well, we didn't have enough time to disclose all this information to you, but our notice of intent to rely on the defense of battered spouse syndrome complied with the requirements found under Rule 3.201B, given the circumstances, which I have the rule saved also. But you see where he has bolded there, insofar as possible. The notice shall contain a statement of particulars showing the nature of the defense, so what the defendant expects to prove, and the names and addresses of the witnesses by whom the defendant expects to show battered spouse syndrome, insofar as possible. So by the end of this paragraph, he's saying, given the circumstances, in other words, insofar as possible, we can't give you what you're asking for because we haven't had enough time.
Yeah, and like I said yesterday, I think that the judge might end up giving them a little bit of time leeway on this, just because this is a piece that they can. He's not going to change the date of the trial. The trial is we're going ahead on October the 7th, but I just felt like this was an area where maybe he could say, I will work with you on that. You don't think that, because he's so freaking fair.
He is, like that. Yeah, he is extremely fair. But in his order that he wrote, he did say he was not moving this trial. So you're saying that you think more time as to what? Because they filed a notice of taking Dr. Julie Harper's deposition today. So that means the state is going to depose her. And that's really interesting because of how it looks to me from my reading of these different cases and my reading of the rule, that what they're doing is it looks like they are not intending Sarah to testify. There's two different ways to get this defense in. One is that the defendant has to testify, and then the experts can testify on top. So that's like what happened in the Depp v. Heard trial, for anybody that watched that. The other option is that the defendant does not testify, and the expert can only speak in hypotheticals, can't speak as to the details of this person's relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. I felt like they're doing everything they can to keep her off the stand too.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think, can you scroll down for me a little bit?
Sure. I got the impression that they were saying, look, we haven't looked at everything. So if we could maybe put off the ruling on this a little till we get some more information, and we can come back with more stuff to show Your Honor.
Yeah, I think you're right. So the cases that he has cited there, Hickson, I've pulled that up. I've pulled these rules that are talking that he's talking about, and I've just put those there for you, Carrie, so that if you ever want to talk about some of these pieces as we see them sort of come to life, it's there for our reference. And I've read everything.
Looks like Medina and Hickson It was referenced several times in this last one he
In
did
this
yesterday.
one, yes. Hickson is sort of like on par with this Weiand case, Weiand, which the two of them sort of go hand in hand for creating this defense. But what was interesting to me about the two motions is that they are giving good legal argument there, in that they are citing back to the case law. And case law is used where you have a set of facts that are similar, and a panel of appellate judges or the Florida Supreme Court or the Supreme Court of the United States creates a new rule based out of an analysis of prior cases and the facts of the current case. So it's just, I'm geeky. It's interesting to me.
Let's look at this Henderson and these cases that they referenced. Let's pull some of these up and see which ones you want to talk about, how this kind of plays off of what he's saying. Okay, this one right here. State of Florida versus Michelle L. Hickson. What'd she do?
I'm assuming that she did some sort of violence to someone, but that's not the important part.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, she shot her, or she stabbed her husband 4 days after she married him, and the state charged her with second-degree murder. So she informed the state that her defense would be self-defense based on the battered spouse syndrome, and that she would offer the testimony of Dr. Kropp, a psychologist who examined her, to support the defense. So the question that this case is answering, because the way this works is that there has to be an issue presented in front of the court. They've sort of dumbed it down. What can an expert testify to when a defendant relies on battered spouse syndrome evidence to support a claim? And where you see by holding, that's the answer to the question. We answer the question by holding. It's the holding of the case, that an expert can generally describe the syndrome and the characteristics of a person suffering from the syndrome, and can express opinion in response to the hypothetical questions predicated on facts and evidence, but cannot give an opinion based on an interview of the defendant as to the applicability of the syndrome to that defendant, unless notice of reliance on such testimony is given and the state has the opportunity to have its expert examine the defendant. So right now,
They don't want that to happen, do they?
I don't think they do, because they would have to let the state talk to Sarah. So this is how you see. So here's how where the rule is sort of made, and then in the motion we just looked at, you can see then how attorneys use those to argue their point back and forth.
All right, so a defendant who takes the stand waives the privilege against compelled self-incrimination. If a defendant were able to rely on her statements being presented to a trier of fact through an expert's testimony, she would, in effect, be able to testify without taking the stand and subjecting herself to the state's questions. Allowing the state's expert to examine a defendant will keep the state from being unduly prejudiced, because of a defendant will not be able to rely on expert testimony that the state has no effect means of rebutting.
So they're saying that a defendant who takes the stand, they're waiving their right to self-incriminate.
Yeah.
And if you put an expert up and the expert could testify as to the person, in this case Sarah, allowing the person to do that would basically be like letting the defendant take the stand without subjecting themselves to the state's questions and incriminating herself. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's why they want the states, if they want an expert to testify as to the specifics of a case, then the state's expert has to be allowed to examine that defendant. They're
Which
saying
is
it's
only fair.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Right.
Therefore, if a defendant decides to use the battered spouse syndrome to support a claim of self-defense, written notice of that effect must be communicated to the state, similar to the procedure set out in Florida Rule of Criminal Procedure 3.216. When a defense expert will be used to demonstrate the presence of the syndrome, the state will then have the opportunity to have the defendant examined by its experts, who will be allowed to testify at trial to rebut a defense expert's testimony. This presents a defendant with a choice of either 1, having her expert testify directly about her case, in which instant the state may have her examined by its expert, or 2, both sides may present the testimony of experts who have not examined the defendant and who will not testify about the facts of her case.
So this is interesting.
I don't understand part 2 of that.
Yeah, exactly. So both sides may present the testimony of experts who have not examined the defendant. Julie Harper has, right? And
Yeah.
they just filed a notice that they were taking her deposition.
What about Dr. Brannon?
I
He
would
brought
have
up
to go
Dr.
back.
Brannon really early on, and Dr. Brannon was on this case with Marcia Thompson.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if he's not. Has he been mentioned again since that initial?
I don't think so, and I don't know. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so do we understand then that she's kind of got two choices here? Or there's a choice, right? And for any of your subscribers who watched the infamous Depp v. Heard trial, it's the battle of the experts there was really interesting. That was also an abuse case. Really interesting battle of the experts. And Amber Heard testified, and a lot of people said that was it, that she was lying, that they didn't believe her, and that was kind of the downfall.
Well,
Right.
her expert was clearly, even those of us who have no experience in this stuff and have not studied any of it, we were all like, this woman's insane. She is literally like, she is a paid to play type person who does not care what the real facts are. She'll say whatever you need her to say. That's exactly
Right.
what she came across.
Right. They found Amber Heard to not be credible, and I think it's because she went too far. I think if she had dialed it back, she might have had a better chance. But I don't know. I mean, the jury spoke.
So, did you want to read on this and kind of?
Well, I just wanted to what we need to take out of here is look at how the state couched it, right? Which was, it was just verbal. It wasn't physical. He was in pain. There were only allegations of the past. But then if you go down and you look at the defense, you will see those words we're looking for: imminent danger. So primacy and recency. So that means how recent was the last attack? Sort of primacy and recency. It's like, how close are we to this danger, right? And the defense is saying, look, we were close at any given time. You never knew what he was going to do, because that cycle was just morphing into one big cycle of violence. And he had ready access to numerous weapons: machete, knives, even even the couch where he was sleeping, the golf club without the head on it so he could beat her with it, the access to a gun. And then if you see there, it says acted out of fear of imminent danger. That's the key language we're looking for. Was Sarah Boone in fear of imminent danger? Sorry.
They had no weapons in Sarah Boone's home, except for that baseball bat that they kept mentioning. But I think I hope that the defense doesn't try to use that against the prosecution and say, well, you're the one that brought the bat in. But Sarah doesn't have any. Sarah had 0 injuries on her when she was after that incident. So
I think they're going to have a big hurdle. Imminent danger. I mean, you just listened to the defense opening of another case. Did you get a sense from her that there was? I mean, I could kind of feel it. Did you feel it?
Oh my God!
Yeah. Okay. Do we get that in any of the DV calls that we see from Sarah?
Well, and 2, and this is just me coming in from a layman standpoint, you're going to have the difference between a man telling that story versus a woman telling that story. And I think that's going to be effective to the jury as well, especially women jurors.
Okay. Well, did you notice that in Marcia Thompson's trial, both opening lawyers were women, and in Sarah's, we have nothing but men?
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, you have all these incidents where he had shown previous issues or outbursts of rage. In this Marcia Thompson case, you don't have that in George's case. You have Sarah calling 911 and Sarah claiming that he did this and he did that. But when we see George on body cam footage, he's way calm.
Right, exactly.
And he states in one of the things that she hits me. I don't want to ever call the cops on her, though.
Right. Right. So, I mean, just the little bit that we know about Sarah's relationship with George, that we have seen through their prior arrests or calls, through Brian Boone's testimony, through the neighbor, Melissa, the property manager, all of that, are we getting a sense of a dangerous man out of that? That George was a dangerous man? If
we stop to, because a lot of us just can't stand Sarah Boone because of all the things she's done since she's been arrested. So if we take that piece of it out, let's take that piece of it out and try to look at it.
Put your dislike for Sarah away.
Exactly.
Right.
I would say, I would question it. And if I was a juror, I'd look at it and go, okay, it's possible. It's possible. You know, another thing I would look at too, and this is just, you guys, this is just fact, okay? Is the jury going to look and say, "Oh, he was a Hispanic man. Hispanic men get angry." Let's say she's got some white women on the jury, and they're like, "Oh yeah, those Hispanic men, they get angry."
Well, they're not supposed to take into account anything like that, but you know, when they go through a voir dire trying to choose a jury, they are looking for people who can sympathize. Well, the defense is looking for people who can sympathize with the defendant.
Yeah.
And I feel like we should qualify this conversation to, I'm saying here that I don't fully believe everything that Sarah Boone is saying. That does not mean I don't believe women who have been battered, or that they aren't. That is not the case at all, or that they should not be believed. We are going off of the information that we have seen and comparing it to what was just described in the opening statements from Marcia Thompson's case. I wanted to do this so we could see what a very strong defense looks like versus what we're working with Sarah's case, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And I apologize. I kind of went off on a little tangent there, but I will say this. You know, it just gave me an idea, Sam, that we should do a separate video on what we think James Owens is going to say about the victim. Because, you know, we're going to get angry, everyone listening to. They're going to make him look horrible.
Yeah. So, well, he's already started to lay that groundwork, right? Mm-hmm. But, I mean, in the press, he started that with his second call into Vinny Politan. And what I found was funny about both of the interviews he gave was that the host had to cut him off both times. So he clearly likes to hear himself talk.
And he brought up Farrell, George's brother, who was the one that is
that's exactly. Yeah.
I wonder, they could easily, well, okay, here's a question. That could be kept out, right? That I would think that
has nothing to do with anything.
You can't bring that into this courtroom.
No, absolutely not. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for that. That was just him stirring the pot. He wants people to be interested. And if you Google search now, this case has picked up mainstream media all over the country. It's insane. You know, it went from being this Florida shit show to like everybody's talking about it. It's so bizarre because it's one woman who got drunk and zipped her boyfriend in a suitcase, passed out, and he died. And she probably knocked him down the stairs. I think she's allegedly murdered. She allegedly murdered George, allegedly, because she is innocent until proven guilty. And I do work for the defense, but you would never know it from this conversation.
Well, I mean, when you have a defendant like that, I mean, who would want to work for the defense? I just feel like he's going to come in and say, yeah, these Boone or these Boone boys, these Torres men, because he kind of said that in his first interview on the courthouse stairs. These Torres guys, they're abusive to their women, and I just think that the state's going to. I guess we'll figure that out when we have the pretrial conference.
So that's not evidence. They'd have to bring a genealogy expert in to introduce anything like that. Okay. The only way he can kind of try to talk about that is in opening and closing statements, because opening and closing statements are not evidence. They are not evidence. And what people don't understand about trials is that there has to be a grounds for a witness to come in, or grounds for like a piece of video to come in. So for example, I think we may have talked about this before, so forgive me if I'm being repetitive, but if we want to get an officer's body cam in, the way that we're going to do that is by putting that officer on the stand, and he's going to say, yes, this is my body cam, and now that piece of film is in evidence. You can't just randomly pull people in off the street. I have people to say to me all the time, oh, so-and-so is going to come and testify on my behalf. I'm like, to what? There's no reason for them to be a part of your trial. What does that have to do with anything? It doesn't work like that, which is why I'm on this big mission to help educate people about how the system works and how it doesn't work. So the why leaving is impossible. That's a big thing, right? Why didn't she just leave him? Because
Sarah? Are we talking about Sarah or Marcia?
Anybody. Those are my notes that I took during the opening of Marcia Thompson's trial. Why leaving is impossible. It's impossible for many women to leave, because if they don't get away, if they don't get completely clear of him, then he will kill her and the children. I mean, you see this come around in movies. And I mentioned on one of our recordings before about the movie The Burning Bed with Farrah Fawcett that came on. I didn't realize Ray Liotta was the husband. It's on YouTube if anybody wants to have a movie night watching that. But if you think about, there was a Julia Roberts movie, right, where she pretended to throw her, pretended
Sleeping
to drown.
with the Enemy?
Yes.
Sleeping with the Enemy?
Yeah, exactly. And he found her, right? He still found her. She went to all that precaution. He still found her. And then there was a Jennifer Lopez one called Enough, where she specifically trained to beat the crap out of him, you know? So I think that all these movies, what they are showing is that it's never as easy as what you think.
Well, I see here that Dr. Brandon testified, and you said that the reference to the battered women and the perception of danger is different than someone who was not a victim of abuse.
Okay, so what she was talking about there was that last night when he was driving in from Broward County, although I thought this was a Broward County case. Oh, it's Palm Beach. He was driving in from Broward and yelling at her on the phone, and the fight continued when he got home. And what the defense was, what the state was saying was it was never physical. It was only verbal. What the defense came back and said was it was different. There was something different this time. And her perception of danger is going to be like having night vision goggles on. She knows, you know what I mean? Versus a person from the outside looking in saying, he was asleep on the couch. Why'd you shoot him in the back?
Another huge difference between the Marcia Thompson case and Sarah Boone's case is that they had children there.
They did have children there.
And he was abusive to them. And we don't have that in Sarah's case.
We don't. We also have what looks like in Marcia Thompson's case was that this happened out in public. So he was not afraid to do that in public. And he publicly went after someone he thought was cheating with his wife on a golf course. I mean, he's involved other people.
Right.
And so I'm guessing, this is a guess. This is a huge guess on my part. The testimony of the ex-girlfriend. Normally, you're not allowed to bring in evidence to prove propensity. In other words, that a person did something now because they did it before. And I'm wondering if that's why she had to be proffered, the ex-girlfriend. Just because he beat the ex-girlfriend doesn't mean he abused the current wife.
Everything they said about that was just what she said happened to her versus what Marcia said happened to her. It was all very similar. And
are they gonna get to see that clip? Or
I
part
was
of
going
that
to say,
clip?
do you want to watch that really quick? Do we want to watch that? But we also need to watch Marcia Thompson's.
Yeah, Marcia's testimony is going to be huge too. And so, Carrie, part of why I thought this might be an interesting exercise was I didn't know how much was going to get filed between now and the trial on this case. And
Yeah.
so this gave us something to work with. Like, okay, let's learn about what this really looks like, because she was acquitted and this case was a year ago and it's in Florida. You see what I'm saying? And we've got sort of a little bit of an overlap here. And I thought in this time between now and when the case goes to trial, this would be something interesting to look at, because women are abused. I mean, that's a real thing. What is Brian going to testify to? That when she got drunk, she was aggressive?
Well, we got 3 or 4 people saying that she was very touchy. And then you've got Brian say that she likes to grab on the neck and scratch the neck and stuff. So yeah, I think and George had all these scratches around his neck. They were just asking her, do you want to testify? Are you sure you want to testify? You don't have to testify. And they brought the jury in. It's going to be interesting if they try to say, kind of going back to the kid thing, if they come back and try to say that he did something around Lucas when he was drunk or something.
Nobody
or how,
ever said that though.
Brian only said that she would say when George was over and they were drinking, she didn't like to have Lucas there. She did state that to Brian, and Brian let that, he was like, yeah, I'm good with that too. He doesn't need to be there. So her defense could go in on that. And it, again, it's not going to be that Sarah was drinking. It's going to be that George was drinking and acting up. So she couldn't see her son as often as she wanted to, because George was there and George was drinking constantly. You know what I mean?
Right. But Brian's interview, we know, is like he had to call her every time that she was supposed to pick him up because she wouldn't show up. And that's why he was calling and calling and calling. So
and then
it's really interesting, the picture that Sarah wants painted. And I think that here's where people are going to be upset. And by people, I mean like the people who are watching all around the internet. The way in which this woman is holding herself out as a battered spouse versus what a battered spouse, a truly battered spouse, looks like. I think we're going to see a lot of fiery internet exchanges here, because there's going to be some people in the camp of always believe the woman, always, always, always believe. Then you've got people who are going to kind of, who don't like Sarah, right? And so like us. And so we're looking at it kind of critically towards her. And
right.
then you've got the people who are like, well, she just flat out made it up and don't believe her at all. And then therefore you should not believe any battered woman or spouse of any. It can happen in reverse. We should qualify with all the things.
I have read a ton of comments in chat from women that say I was abused, and I am just offended highly.
Exactly. I think
what Sarah's doing here.
But then we're going to see these staunch advocates of women come out and say you should always believe her. Always believe her. But George was only ever arrested after he got with Sarah.
Yes, his history, we've gone and looked at his history. It's another video. I'll attach it to this one. He had a great relationship with his wife, at least from what we could tell. I would imagine that they split up because of his drinking. I think he drank too much, and I do believe that. But I don't think he was aggressive drunk. I don't think he was
I
aggressive
think they were
drunk.
both alcoholics. I mean, Brian said that she had a drinking problem even before Lucas was born. And I mean, I think it's very evident that she was an alcoholic and was not really aware of it, since she told the police she can't get drunk.
I want to go back to what I was saying about the kids, though. Melissa Sexton has she gave testimony to the cops in her interview. She said that George was seen outside playing with Lucas quite often, and Sarah was never seen outside playing with Lucas, Sarah's son. So if they're going to bring the kids into this, that's going to be brought up too. All right, I'm going to go ahead and play this. I got to go feed my dogs before they have a bit. Let me
Okay.
hit play. If I can find the play button.
Seated. Ms. Thompson, or Ms. Michelli, please call your next witness.
The defense calls Marcia Thompson, the defendant, to the stand.
Ms. Thompson, please raise your right hand. Prepare to be
I
sworn.
love the audio in this courtroom. Can I just say that really quick, by the way? It's awesome. And I hope they
Ma'am,
do
please
something
take the
about
stand.
Sarah's audio in her courtroom.
Yeah, that may not even be her courtroom by the time it gets to trial.
Ms.
They
Michelli,
may
do you
move
wish to
it to a
inquire?
bigger room.
I do, Your
You
Honor.
may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Thompson, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Okay. Keep in mind we can take breaks. There's a tissue box. Okay. Ms. Thompson, please tell the jury how old you are.
44,
Where were you born?
North Miami, Florida.
Where did you grow up?
In Miami, North Miami Beach area.
What was your profession up until August of 2019?
Customs and Border Protection supervisor.
Now, what you said you were a supervisor, is that your position that you held?
Yes, the official is supervisory CBP officer.
Now, I know border protection is not border patrol.
Correct.
Okay, so they're two different things.
Yes.
What is border protection? What was your mission at your job?
My last station was here at the Port of Palm Beach at the seaport, and we were in charge of the cruise ship that traveled to the Bahamas. So checking the people, their documents, their luggage, and then the flights that came into the airport here at Palm Beach.
When did you meet Terry Thompson?
I met him in 2000, year 2000.
In what context? Like, how did you guys meet each other?
We were both at the University of Florida at the time.
What year were you in? Were you a freshman? Were you a sophomore?
That was my junior year.
And how old were you?
I was 20,
How old was he?
32.
Had he been in the military prior to going to college?
Yes,
Is that why you're both in college, but he's a bit older?
yes.
Did you start dating right away?
No.
You met in the context of friends, or what was the meeting like?
He was the vice president of the Criminology and Law Honor Society that I was a member of.
Were you friends first?
Yes,
And how long before you started dating?
about a year.
Once you started dating, how did you feel about him?
In his uniform is what caught my eye first. He was confident, he was charming, he was funny. And he was the first guy who ever really took an interest in me.
Before that, had you had a boyfriend?
No, no,
Any prior experience with intimacy with men?
no.
Why do you think that is?
Response.
I'll move on.
Okay.
What was the relationship like at first?
We would do a lot of fun things with the group at school, the honor society. They would hold events outside of school. He had 2 young children that I would help him watch sometimes and do stuff with.
Those are from a prior marriage, those children?
Yes.
How tall was Terry Thompson?
He was 6 foot.
How much did he weigh?
He went between 225 to 240.
How long after you started dating did you notice any signs that the relationship was changing?
Um, Probably a few months in. If I missed his call, he would be upset, questioning where I was, who was I with. Um, he expected me to be available to him at all times, and he was very jealous on if I had any male friends and who I did things with.
Now, when you say he expected you to be available for his call, does that include even if you were in classes?
It didn't matter where I was. It could be class, 2 a.m., 5 a.m., whenever he called.
Did you try to answer those calls
Yes,
even if you were in class or
yes,
asleep?
yes.
What would happen when you didn't?
He would be very upset, and he would question me on what I was doing, who was I with, why didn't I answer the call, and usually want to know if I was with some guy that I hadn't told him about.
When you say very upset, was he screaming?
Yes,
Were you screaming back?
no,
So it wasn't like the kind of tumultuous relationship where you're both really angry and screaming.
no,
Have you ever screamed at him?
never,
Not even in the beginning of the relationship
never,
and not at the end either?
no.
Were you guys living together?
We lived together for a brief time when I finished college. He let me stay with him because there was a few months between when I was leaving for the U.S. Customs Academy at the time.
Other than that, were you not living together?
No,
Was it common throughout the relationship that it would be long distance?
yes.
Why is that generally?
Well, because we were both in college. He graduated a year before me. Um, he had a job locally for a little while. I got accepted with U.S. Customs after I graduated the following year, and my station was going to be in Miami. He was still up in the Gainesville, Lake City area. And then he got activated into the military stateside in 2005 into South Carolina.
Whenever the relationship was long distance, were you always still together in a relationship?
Yes.
Were you ever out of the relationship where you were dating others?
No, not me.
Did the calls at night and throughout the day, did that get worse? Did that increase?
It did.
Did you start to be deprived of sleep?
Yes.
Can you explain?
So there would be a lot of calls at 1, 2 in the morning where he would be driving and said that he wanted to talk. So initially it started with me just talking to him to help him stay awake while he drove from one place to another. That's how it started.
And during these times, were these times where you had to be up in the morning to do something, whether it's work or school?
Yes.
And how did that affect you?
It was hard to focus. I would fall asleep driving a lot, where I could feel my neck snap back from where I could feel I fell asleep. I would make some mistakes on when I was at school for assignments or at work, just hard to remember a lot of things that I had to do.
Now, at that point, had Terry Thompson ever laid a hand on you, a physical violence?
And not while we were in college, no.
Did he ever throw things at you?
He did in my direction.
Like what?
He threw a pill bottle that was on his counter once when he was angry.
And were you scared?
Yes.
How did you feel about the state of the relationship at this point?
At the beginning, he was my first boyfriend. He was a lot more confident than me. He had a lot of opposite traits than me that he helped kind of sometimes would show me stuff, teach me things. So the throwing, of course, scared me, but I was able to calm him down pretty quick at the beginning.
Did you ever object to his behavior? And what I mean by that is, did you ever say, hey, you don't treat me that way?
No,
Did you ever say, honey, maybe you shouldn't treat me like, maybe you don't talk like me. Maybe you said it in a much nicer way. Did you object in a nice way to his behavior?
no,
Did you ever tell him that any of the things he was doing were not acceptable or he needed to stop them?
no.
Why not?
He had told me a lot of stories about how his previous wives had mistreated him, and women continuously mistreated him and respected him and questioned him. And I'm more conservative and little submissive, so I didn't think it was like my place to question him or to give him a lot of questions back at the beginning. After that, it was he would get angry anytime I even attempted to maybe say something. It wasn't going to be a question, but even just a comment.
Okay. So we've gotten into the first few months of the dating. You knew each other a year, then you started dating. You're dating a few months. These behaviors are going on. Are they increasing over time?
Yes.
At any point, the relationship become physically abusive?
Yes.
Now, before we get to that, up until now, had there been any berating?
Yes.
Okay. And was that based on your looks? What was it based on?
Usually it was how I dressed or how I had my hair done.
Would that make him angry?
Yes.
Okay. At any point, did the relationship become physically abusive?
Yes.
And by that, I mean where, not just talking and not just saying anything that could sound violent, but actual touch.
Yes.
And approximately when was this?
Approximately 2006.
Where were you when this happened?
This was in South Carolina in a hotel.
Were you guys on vacation or or did one of you live there?
He lived there and I had traveled to visit him.
And at this point, you guys have been dating about 5 years?
Yes.
You're not married, correct?
No.
What happened?
So I went on a planned visit to see him, a planned trip. And he had said his place was very dirty and he didn't want to bring me into where he was staying at when it was dirty. So we got a hotel that he'd like to stay at.
Once we were at the hotel, were you spending time together?
Yes.
What were you guys doing?
We had had dinner, went back to the hotel, and he wanted to have sex.
Okay. Did you agree?
Yes.
What happened next?
He started to have sex. Then he started questioning me on why I didn't answer his phone calls last week.
Okay. Was there a time where you didn't answer his calls?
Yes.
Were you with another man?
No.
Did you try to explain to him what had happened?
I did.
Had you already explained to him previously what had
Yes, because he had already questioned me about it when it happened.
happened? Was he mad?
He was extremely angry.
Okay. And what happened next?
So he started questioning me. He didn't believe me that I was working. That's what I was doing at the time when I couldn't answer him. Then he got a lotion bottle. He got a lotion bottle and he put it into my vagina.
Did you want that to happen?
No,
Did that hurt?
it did.
Did you fight back?
No,
What else happened?
he punched me in the stomach and choked me.
When you say he choked you, did he wrap his hands around your neck?
Yes,
And how long did he leave it there? I'm trying to get an idea of how it happened.
I don't know, probably a few seconds.
Okay. Did it stop you from breathing for those few seconds?
I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. Yes.
Was that the first time he ever sexually assaulted you?
Yes.
And is that the first time he ever physically hurt you?
Yes.
Did you get up and run away?
No.
What did you do?
He told me to get a rag to clean him off when he was finished.
Did you do that?
Yes.
And what happened next?
He went to sleep.
What were you thinking at this time?
I was in shock. I couldn't believe what just happened. I didn't know what to think.
Did he apologize to you?
He did.
Was it sincere?
It seems so.
Did you forgive him?
I did.
Did you break up with him?
No.
Try or threaten to leave him?
No.
Did you ever threaten to leave him?
No.
After that, did the relationship go back to its norm, which is sort of the controlling behaviors, but not physically abusive?
Yes.
For how long?
Probably into the next year.
After a year, was there an occasion where there was another episode of domestic violence, physical?
Yes.
And during that year, was he still emotionally abusive,
Yes.
verbally abusive?
Yes.
Was he controlling you?
Very much. Yeah.
The next physical episode about a year later, can you tell me what happened?
He was driving to come see me when I lived in Hialeah, and he called me on the way, on the drive, and again said that he knew I was sleeping with somebody because I missed his calls, and I needed to tell him who it was.
Okay. This is happening over the phone?
Yes.
But how long is this going on before he arrives?
Maybe about an hour, half hour.
Okay. Once he gets there, what happens?
He's still angry. He's trying to get me to admit that I'm sleeping with somebody. I'm trying to plead with him, telling him I'm not sleeping with anybody. I'm not with anybody else. But he won't listen to me.
At any point, are you yelling at him?
No.
Are you doing what you can to appease him?
Yes.
He wouldn't believe you.
No.
What happened next?
He pulled my hair down to the side, threw me to the ground, and kicked me in the stomach.
When you hit the ground, were you hurt?
Yes, it hurt.
How hard does he kick you? He's kicked you. This is the second time he's kicked you in the stomach. How hard are we talking?
It hurt. It was I was sore for a few days after the kick.
Did you try to stop him?
No.
Did you fight back?
No.
When it was over, what happened?
He apologized, saying that he was sorry for being so jealous. He just didn't want to share me with anybody else.
You said this is 2007.
Yes,
After that incident, soon after, did you get engaged?
yes.
How long after that incident did he propose?
It was a few months.
And were those months calm in terms of physical violence?
Yes.
Now, going forward after that, how often were you two seeing each other since you were long distance?
About every 6 weeks. I would go all of my days off that were like three or 4 days in a row.
And during these visits, every 6 weeks or so, was there an episode of physical violence?
Almost all of them.
And this is going from 2007 until about 2011.
Yeah, there was a break from when we got engaged to like after the marriage, shortly after the getting married.
And otherwise, we're looking at once every about 6 weeks of that time,
Yes,
there would be a physical attack.
correct.
And what would instigate it? And I'm not saying you instigated. I'm just saying what would come up? Like why would it happen?
It typically was that he couldn't get a hold of me on the phone, that it went straight to voicemail, or I didn't respond fast enough to his text message, and that he thought I was cheating on him.
Before the physical violence, how would the argument be? And I'm asking you, like, how much is he yelling? How upset is he? How loud is it getting? Like, describe it to me.
So he's yelling loudly. I don't yell back at him. He would yell for periods of time, give me dressing up for him, having my hair the way he liked it, how
Would he call you names?
oh yeah.
What kind of
He
names
was-
would he call you?
He would call me a whore, slut, bitch, cunt, a lot of bad names.
And this is what he's screaming at you during these arguments.
Yes.
And when they became physical, and for this, I'm not going to ask you about every incident for every 6 weeks, but in general, what were these physical incidents like? What do they include?
Start by yelling, the accusations, and then a majority of them were the hair pulling down to the ground, kick in the stomach, and then there would be choking.
Was it getting worse with time?
Yes.
What about the sexual assaults? How often would that be?
Those were less often, but maybe 3 or 4 times a year.
And did they always include penetration with objects?
Usually, yes.
Would you bleed?
I would.
Would you be physically injured?
Yes, I would.
Jesus.
Would you go to the doctor?
I did.
Other than the injuries you got at the time, whether it be cuts and bruises and pain, were there sort of long-term overtime injuries that you sustained?
Yes, I had herniated disc from being pushed into appliances, thrown to the ground. Says the repeated abuse. They usually ask me at the doctor, like, were you in a car accident? Like, what trauma happened to you?
Did you ever tell them what was happening to you?
No.
Neck problems,
Back problems and neck problem.
Okay. Chronic pain.
Yes.
Did you have to be treated or did you ever take care of this?
They usually gave me injections to help with the pain. And then in 2020, because he didn't want me going to the doctor, the only time I was able to go to urgent care was when I could barely move. So I wouldn't be able to work if I didn't do something. And I was able to get the surgery in 2020.
In 2020, what surgery were you able to get?
It's ACDF to fuse the herniated disc in the neck.
Has that helped with your pain?
It has, yes.
During these incidents, would you be screaming and crying?
Crying, and a few incidents I did scream, just couldn't help it. But it wasn't screaming at him, just because of the injuries.
And how did he take that?
He did not like it. He couldn't stand me crying. He said I was trying to manipulate him.
Would that make him go at you even harder?
Yes,
Did you try everything you could not to cry?
I would try, yes.
Did you try to not scream?
Yes.
You talked about Terry Thompson having other children that you were involved with and that you also took care of in the beginning. Is that right?
It helped him, yes.
Okay. So you were aware that he had been previously married.
Yes.
And at first, did you know of any abuse in those relationships?
At first, no.
What did you think went on in those relationships?
Rephrase.
What did he tell you went on in those relationships?
He told me that the women were trying to keep his kids away from him.
As the years went on, did he tell you differently?
Yes.
What was the first thing that he revealed to you in terms of his prior violence?
The first thing was how he attacked his ex-wife with a machete and threatened to kill her and slit her throat.
What's her name?
Marcia Thompson.
In what context did he tell you that?
When he was accusing me of cheating, wanting me to tell him the truth, he said, I will hurt you like I did Melissa.
And then he gave you those details?
Yes.
Approximately where are we in the relationship when he first tells you that? And I mean, give me a year where you first learned about this.
This was after we were married, so it would have been 2009.
What is his second wife's name?
Well, Melissa is the second wife.
And she's the first one you found out about.
Correct, yes.
What is the next thing you found out about?
About his first wife,
What's her name?
Christine Thompson.
And initially he had told you that she was just keeping the kids away and that was the problem between them.
Yes, that she would they had one daughter, keep the daughter away, and that she would go to his job at corrections and disrespect him and act crazy out in front of the workplace.
And what did he state later?
He stated later that he threatened to kill her as well to keep her in line.
Did he initially reveal this during an act of abuse toward you?
Yes.
And why was he telling you this?
He was trying to scare me and it worked. He said that he would get away with what he was doing to me just like he did them.
It looks like it's cut off at that.
Okay. So we have her testimony and we have Sarah's interviews. Shall we compare?
You don't want to open up the interview right now, do you really? Do you really?
No, I don't want you to open up the interview. I mean, we've seen it a gazillion times.
I
I'm just
know.
saying what we know. We don't have to watch that again. We know it was a good day.
It
We
was
were
a good
having
day.
a good day. I sent you that song earlier today.
It was
by the way.
unintentional. It was unintentional.
Unintentional. That's really super important. I forgot to tell you that. It's in a rule. It's in one of the rules. So it's really, really, really important that she continued to say it was unintentional,
It's
because
not fair.
unintentional means it's an accident. And guess what? You don't have self-defense if it's an accident.
I don't get drunk. I can't get drunk. I don't want to get drunk.
Right? But it was an accident. It wasn't intentional. She just negated a defense by saying that.
Yeah. I took care of George. It's
Right.
not fair.
I did so much for him.
Tell me and we'll both know.
Yeah.
Ask anyone.
Well,
I don't
they
like being out of sorts. Hang on. I'm trying to find my notes here from, because I do have some good notes on her testimony that I can chime in here, because we're talking about stuff I do know now. Okay. Oh. You want me to kind of read you some of my notes and then you just tell me
I
when
want your thoughts, because you have been doggedly following this case for a long time. I
Okay,
have been in and out of it for years. So I want to know what you have to say and think. Nobody needs to know any more about what I have to say.
Okay. Totally different persona, looking at a woman sitting up on the stand, breathing heavy, crying, versus Sarah, who is talking about how she helped George, that, she was trying to keep his mind off of things. She was controlling the situation. She was setting up the painting. She was setting up puzzles. They were talking. He was, they had a great conversation. Again, enjoying each other's company. She said that about three or four times. Totally different demeanors in the two women. Sarah lied several times about her drinking. Sarah claims that they were playing and having fun, and again, said it again, enjoying each other's company. One thing I did notice is that Sarah, of course, this was right after everything had happened, and Marcia Thompson got on the stand, years after all of her abuse had happened. But Sarah was very anxious in the car. She had a hard time just focusing on the interview, and she was probably mentally exhausted from trying to keep her story straight. Because she had been, the cops had been there for 4 hours at that point.
Right.
Sarah was very defensive in her discussion with the police, whereas Marcia is just, ask me the question and I'll tell you, and when I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to relive it when I tell you it. And it was true tears, real tears, versus Sarah's fake tears. I don't know if Sarah really ever had any tears in those interviews, any of them.
I don't either. I had them playing again today. I need to stop with that. But I would notice how she could work herself up for a few seconds and then it'd be right back down again. And she reminded me a lot of Alec Murdaugh. When he testified, he did the same thing. He'd work himself right up into a pretend cry, and 2 seconds later, he'd be done with it.
Yeah. It's like a switch was flipped. I mean, and usually when you're crying like that and you're upset, it takes you a moment. And as you're still talking about other stuff, your voice is still changing as you're trying to straighten up. You're sniffling still, all that. None of that. It was all dry. It was all very dry.
Right.
The calmness, I guess, afterwards. I don't know what happened with Marcia afterwards.
She called 911. After she shot him, she called 911. She left her gun on top of the refrigerator, whatever they told her to do. She led the kids out of the house. And I don't know. I have to go back and read more to know what happened after that. Obviously, she was charged with murder.
I'm sure we can find her 911 call. Let's hope we can. So if we can, we'll go back and watch that. Sarah was immediately jumping to, George's health was bad. His teeth were falling out. How could this happen? I don't know what happened. Whereas Marcia was like, yeah, I did it. I did it.
Right. So from what you've heard on Marcia's case, would you feel that she acted in self-defense even though he was sleeping?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I would have probably acquitted her. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have more of the elements that we could talk about at a later date of what goes into what the jury has to find Sarah guilty, or for Sarah to be found not guilty.
Well, in all fairness, though, I will say this. We're not looking at Marcia Thompson's police interrogation right after it happened versus looking at Sarah's. But
right,
if I can get it, I will. I'll look and see if I can't find something.
Well, we've also had clips of Sarah in court. We've had Sarah's writings. It's not that Sarah. It's not that we haven't had a lot to go by with Sarah.
I've helped him. I've done everything for him. Ask anybody. The manager at the office.
She said I'd bail him out of jail, and the officer said, "You put him in jail."
Right. Right.
You don't get to claim that you were so good as to bail him out when you're the one that put him in there in the first place.
Well, I think we've done all the damage we can do on this particular video with this comparison.
Do you think?
No, I say me doing damage. You've brought it all together for us, and I appreciate all the time and effort.
Hopefully, I didn't confuse everybody.
No, you guys, Sam did a lot of background work on this one. I did very little. So I just want to thank you for bringing all that to the table for us. Well, we will probably get into more of this as we go. If this battered spouse thing sticks, this is not the last time we're going to be discussing it.
Right. But I'll tell you what, you're going to have the most educated chat on YouTube. Do you know?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right with you, girl. Yeah, thank you so much for doing that, Sam. We appreciate you. All right. So with that, we'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and feel free to leave a comment. Have a blessed day.